describe a scenario to you. It's Washington, D.C. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning, rush hour. Thousands of people are passing through the subway, the underground as well. They hear, but maybe not notice, a man dressed as a busker playing a violin. They've probably heard what he's playing before, but it doesn't really play in their minds much. And in the space of the next 45 minutes, even over 2,000 people will pass by this busker, only 7 will stop to listen. Turns out this busker was a man named Joshua Bell. Has anyone ever heard that name before?
Yes.
Yeah. People nodding around here, I can see. This is part of a social experiment with the Washington Post, in which Joshua Bell, who is actually one of the most renowned concerto violinists in the world, who was on that very day, albeit dressed as a busker, playing some of the world's most complex pieces of music on a $3 million violin, he decided to team up with the Washington Post for this experiment because he had a theory that if he was dressed as a busker rather than dressed in his tuxedo and in a concert hall where people pay $100 per night just to watch him, and these concerts sell out frequently, that actually nobody would stop to listen even though he was playing exactly the same music at the same standard for free in the middle of the Washington Metro. And the question he posed in the aftermath of this study was, how much else are we missing by not paying attention and judging a book by its cover, so to speak? I put it to you that the same goes for an argument. How many times are we ignoring the content, the substance of a person's argument, and instead judging them by their qualifications, by the state of their suit, or by their seniority, or by their cultural background? This is the aim of a great debater. In a nutshell, what I want, what all of us on a debating circuit take great pride in what we do want, is not for you to be able to blow away your opponents in a blaze of glory, sounding like Denzel Washington in The Great Debaters, which actually isn't a really good film to watch if you want to learn about debating. Rather, what we want is for you to be able to hand your argument to somebody, maybe dressed as a busker, maybe a 4-year-old child, or maybe the Prime Minister themselves, and for that not to change the way the argument is received. Because instead that argument will be judged on its content rather than the attributes of the person delivering it. So this is what we aspire to in debating. So with mantra of public speakers, like our venerable Toastmasters here, is it's not what you say that matters, but how you say it. For debaters, it will be, it's not what conclusion you draw, but how you reach it. That is most important to us. And indeed, when I will be judging tonight's debates, both the impromptu, but most importantly, the paired debates, I will be looking not just at the conclusions you arrive at, but moreover, the way in which you reach those conclusions, and how you explain the way you reached those conclusions to the rest of us. Because for an opinion to be valid depends purely on the speaker's capacity to defend it. I'm not talking about telling the truth here. I'm not talking about having all the facts. We're talking about how do you put a set of assumptions, and indeed maybe backed up by evidence, maybe not, together to reach a conclusion, and how you defend that conclusion in the face of scrutiny. And that's what we're looking for tonight. So the question is, what really is the problem at the moment with the level of debate? Why is it so important that we care about this? Isn't it already the case that people are judged on the merits of their arguments? Well, I put it to you that it is. Did anyone here watch the EU debate between Nick Clegg and Nigel Farage? Got a few hands. Okay, fantastic. Did anybody read about it afterwards, or know what was going on, or have people interested in it? Okay, fantastic. Now there was one particular word that was thrown about at large during both debates by both candidates. And that word was trust. How many of you believe it is important to trust the speaker when deciding whether or not to side with them? How many of you do not believe that is important? Okay. How many people here trust, let's take a reasonably popular figure. How many people here trust Richard Branson? How do you consider to be a trustworthy person, generally speaking? There wasn't a particular point for that question. I was more just saying, I wanted to juxtapose that with somebody who was seen as maybe a less trustworthy figure. Like, for example, how many people would trust Tony Blair? Now, would your varying levels of trust in Richard Branson and Tony Blair, although at the moment there don't appear to be that many varying levels of trust between them, really make any difference at all if they try to explain to you why 5 + 5 = 10? Would you need to trust Tony Blair to believe that he was right? You would? So you would refuse to believe that 5 + 5 = 10 if Tony Blair told you?
Well, I know 5 + 5 = 10.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to explain to me about something that I'm not too sure about, and if I don't trust him, then it'll be difficult to believe him.
Sure. Okay. That's fine. I think what we're trying to get at here is that debating is seen as something of an art form, almost, where a lot of the focus is placed on the gesticulation, on the language used, and Mr. or Madam Speaker, and this House believes this, and this House would do that, and being the most boisterous and loudest and passionate speaker possible, and that this is what we think of when we think of debating. I think of debating as more of a science. For me, debating is closer to 5 + 5 = 10 rather than grand theatre. Because ultimately, what you're looking for in an argument, in a valid argument, is something that can be subject to scrutiny, something that can be independently verified. And that's what we're really talking about. To give an example of what that looks like, an independently verified argument. I'll give you an example of, again, the EU debate. That's the one that most people think of when we talk about debate at the moment, because that's the most recent debate that we've heard. An argument that was put forward by Nigel Farage, who I personally can disagree with, but I still think won the debate. He was asked a question. The question was, could UK infrastructure cope with EU immigration? That was a question that was asked to him. Now, he had been saying for a long time, as some of you may be aware, he's been making statements about the number of people who come into the country, who have the right to come to the country, and that's very much the basis of a lot of his campaign. That again formed the basis of his answer. He said, when 485 million people can come to a country at will, at any time, then that makes it very difficult to plan exactly how many hospitals you need to build, how many houses you need to build, how many school places you need to make available, and therefore, how do you ensure your infrastructure is able to cope if you don't know how many people there are going to be in your country at any one time? Now, this is an example of a valid argument. I'm not saying the saying is right. It's quite possible that the facts underlying that assumption, the evidence underlying that assumption, is not there. Indeed, one of the biggest criticisms of this campaign is that there are no grounds to believe that we are going to see sort of 20 or 30 million people all coming to the country at once, and actually the figure is fairly steady. However, that aside, and then that's something that you can check, you don't need to trust him over, that aside, the argument he makes is combining what we call two premises to reach a conclusion. Premise one is that if 485 million people come in the country at any time, you have no idea how many people will be in your country at any one time. Premise two is that if you don't know how many people are going to be in your country at any time, then how can you plan how many houses you need to build, and how many hospitals you need to build, and so on, all things associated with infrastructure. Now, it doesn't matter whether you trust them or not. That is a perfectly valid argument. That makes sense. That is a valid connection between the two. And it doesn't matter whether it be Nigel Farage saying it, whether it be Nick Clegg saying it, whether it be me saying it, whether it be a busker in the street saying it. That would still make sense, independently of the person saying it. So if the person making an argument doesn't matter, if I need to know who they are, then why do I need to trust them? When it could easily be someone I trust or someone I don't trust making the same argument. And that's what we really want from a debate, is to not need to trust or distrust or care about whether we trust or distrust the person delivering the argument, but to be able to critique that argument by taking it to its logical conclusion. An example of an invalid argument made in the same debate was that the EU wants its own navy and army, and therefore we should leave the EU. Now that's an example of an invalid argument, because what you've got there is you've got one premise, which is the EU wants its own navy and army, which again, you can verify yourself. If that's a factual question where you need to check whether that is true, you can do the research. You can find out whether that assumption is based or grounded in any evidence. You don't need to trust them. What's missing is a second premise as to why that's bad, as to why that causes a problem, as to why it would be a good thing as opposed to a bad thing. And therefore, the conclusion that is reached, we should leave the EU, is invalid. Because even if that statement, that original statement about the EU wanting a navy and an army is completely true, it could either be a good thing or a bad thing. And until you tell me that, then how am I meant to decide which way to go? Whether to opt to stay in or to leave on that basis. So that's the difference between a valid argument and an invalid argument. Now before I continue and set out the criteria on which I will be judging tonight's debate, does anybody have any questions just on what I've said there? Does everyone understand everything that I've said? Okay. So what am I looking for in tonight's debate? Well, first and foremost, it's going to sound simple, but it's actually critical. I'm looking for definitions. Ultimately, before any one of us can decide whether to agree or disagree with what is being said up here, we need to know what it is you're talking So, for example, if we're having a debate about anything, and one person, and we're referring to, for example, the sky without even defining what colour it is, or if we're talking about where one person thinks that the sky is red, one person thinks the sky is blue, then where the implications extend from that will still be very confusing. Definitions matter a great deal. If you are not clear about exactly what it is this debate is about, then you're going to lose control of your audience and the way they interpret that. So I'll give you an example of what we mean. There was a debate that took place in the Central London Debating Society several years ago. It was in the aftermath of, does anyone remember a guy called Abdel Magrahi, known otherwise known as the Lockerbie bomber? And the Scottish government, the Scottish Justice in 2011, decided to release him from jail early on compassionate grounds. And the motion for this particular debate was, this House believes life should mean life. Now, there are a number of things that could mean if you just leave it there open. Who can give me a few suggestions of how you might interpret that if I didn't provide any context whatsoever?
Until he passes away.
Sorry?
Until he passes away.
Okay. That's something specific to that case, but let's say I hadn't told you that had happened before, that provided context for this particular debate. Let's just say I said, we're going to have a debate about this House believes life should mean life. How could that be defined? What debate would we have? Yeah?
Any organism which displays signs of life.
Okay, perfect. Give me another example of what we could be debating. What topical issues do you think come up that would fit that motion as openly and vaguely defined as it is? Yeah?
What's the meaning of life?
Yeah? Exactly. We could have that type of debate. We could also be talking about things like, we could talk about criminal justice, like we were talking about in this debate, but we could also be talking about abortion, or we could be talking about euthanasia. We could be talking about a range of different issues, all that correspond with this has to be life should mean life in any context. So we need to define what it means. And in this particular debate, even when the context was provided, everybody was still expecting a debate about this house believes that a life sentence should mean a life sentence. That's the debate everyone was expecting to hear. And that it meant that if you were convicted of something and sentenced to life, you should stay there for life. That's the argument everyone was expecting to hear from the proposition, the people arguing in favour of the motion. Instead, what they got was the first speaker of the proposition stood up and said, here's our issue. That it was a court of law that decided to impose a life sentence. However, it was a politician who used their veto to override it and release this person. And we say politicians make decisions based on what's in their best interest when they're elected, rather than what is most compliant with the law. So, what we are going to propose tonight is that when a judge sentences somebody to life in jail, only another court of appeal can overturn that. So we would take the power of politicians to override life sentences away from them. Now that is still perfectly complicit with the motion. This House believes life should mean life, except a new condition has been attached to it. And as a result, the opposition found it very, very difficult to deal with this, because a very specific definition had been given to make clear to the audience what this debate was about, and more importantly, what it was not about. The definitions are really important, because when you are speaking first, that gives you all the power. When you are proposing something new, when you are introducing a topic, this is your chance to take the initiative and take the floor from underneath the opposition's feet in defining the motion in a very specific way that still stays true to what the motion says, but also ensures that is perhaps something different from what they're expecting, but more importantly, something that the audience can very, very clearly understand. That's what we're talking about here. Secondly, I'm looking for analysis as well. And by this, I mean look at the structure of an argument. Is each speaker combining two premises to reach a conclusion? And does that make sense? Does 5 plus 5 equals 10? That's what we're looking for. If you think their assumption is based on shaky facts, or if you question the evidence on which their assumptions are based, which their premises are based, to use a more accurate term, that shouldn't factor into your decision whatsoever as to whether you think they won that debate or not. Because it is for the other side to challenge any facts that are put forward by the other side. Because ultimately, in the world that we live in, unless facts are challenged, unless flaws of logic are challenged, then conclusions are accepted, which is one of the main problems we have in a world where not enough attention is paid to the importance of debating. I also want to talk about comparisons. You'll see in one or two of these motions, they are comparative motions, meaning saying one thing is better than the other thing. If you're going to propose that one thing is better than something else, then you need first of all to explain why the two are incompatible. Why you cannot have both at the same time. And then go on to explain why one is better than the other. I once had a debate where there were two students who I was teaching during my time in Rwanda, where we were running a national debate training program there. And the debate was about whether French and English should both be taught at the same time. And the first side was talking about why it would be great that they were both taught together, why we could have our cake and eat it very easily. And the other side talked about all the great things that learning English meant. All the things you could study, all the things you could do. That side lost. Because despite all the brilliant benefits they demonstrated of speaking English, what they didn't do is explain why it was impossible to live in a country where French and English were both taught at the same time, both had equal status placed upon them. So if you're comparing two things, and you're proposing one thing is better than something else, your first job is to say why the two are incompatible, and not just to say why one thing is better than the other. And finally, I want you to think about signposting. This is something which is more about a public speaking technique than a debating technique, but I've seen so many great arguments fall on deaf ears because of a lack of signposting. And all this simply means is, when you're making an argument, especially if you have multiple points, what I want you to do is, first of all, say what you're going to say. Then say it, and then say what you say. It's that simple. So introduce your argument by saying, this is what my speech is about, these are the points I'm going to make, take us through the points, label them, give them titles, let us know which point you're on at any given time, and then at the end, tell us, these are the 3 points I made. Make it very clear, very easy to understand. I'm coming to the end of my time here for my opening presentation to you. I will be taking questions at the end if you do have any further questions. What I thought I would do, it depends how this corresponds with the program, is since the next step is to have our impromptu debates, where we just set a topic, I set a topic, a question really, a statement, where I'll ask two people, one person to speak in favour of it, one person to speak against, just for a minute or two, to see if we can put some of these skills into practice. I thought I'll use my last minute just to say, just to announce these topics for this impromptu debate, and then perhaps select some speakers to actually come up and take part in this immediate exercise. Is that in line with the program for tonight? Fantastic. Okay. So what I'd like is two volunteers. I'll tell you the topic once you get up here. I'd believe that that's the Toastmasters way, the table topics. So if I can have 2 volunteers for the first impromptu debate. So I'm only looking for a speaker to speak for 1 minute. Have a first volunteer?
Yeah.
Fantastic, welcome, thank you very much. Have a second volunteer, yes, just over there. Welcome, thank you very much. So here what I'm looking for, rather than a speech designed to hold our attention, what I'm looking for here is the process you would follow for making this particular decision in this dilemma that I'm about to put to you. A very simple one, and what I want to see is what principle or what rule you create in order to determine how you make this decision. So the scenario is this. You're walking on the street and you find a wallet on the ground. You have 2 options. You can either pick up the wallet, keep it for yourself, or you can hand the wallet into the nearest police station. So, madam, you will be telling us why you would keep the wallet, and sir, you will be telling us why you would choose to hand it in to the authorities. I'm looking for a 1-minute argument, not so much tell us why, not so much tell us exactly what you would do, but how you would go about reaching the conclusion to do what I've told you.
Should I start?
Go.
Yeah, okay. I would keep the wallet because in terms of time and efficiency, I can keep the wallet, to go through the wallet, and if there are any money in it, I will give it to some charity, and I find a more effective way of doing something good to the society. or I can look at the IDs in the wallet myself to return it back to the right person.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is taking the wallet. I don't know what is in it. Do I care? No. Do I know who it is? No. So I'll keep it with me, bring it to the station and say, Mr. Policeman, I found this wallet. I was alone in the street. I did not have anyone with me to witness what it is in. So I don't want to be blamed. And as you are now my witness, and I'm your witness, we can see and discover what we have in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to both our speakers for an interesting demonstration there. A round of applause for